Hi everybody, I'm Maggie. Welcome to Experiments in Crafting. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a corner-to-corner blanket. The corner-to-corner blanket is a really popular crochet blanket style. It's a really nice pattern because you don't have to chain a whole long row and then work your first row into chains. For this blanket, I'm going to be using Bernat Baby Blanket Stripes. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about this yarn, check the description for a link to my review. This yarn is number 6 yarn. They recommend using a 8mm hook. For this project, I'm actually going to be using a 9mm hook, and that is because I've found when I work up this yarn, it has a little bit of drag to it, and I've found if I use a slightly larger hook, I don't have that problem. Because this project gauge doesn't matter, going up a little bit in hook size will not matter either. Because this is a striped yarn, I'm going to have to do a little bit of planning before I get started. As I work, I'm going to have to change from one ball to the next, and because of the way that this yarn is produced, they don't stop and start each ball in the same spot. So when I'm working, I'm going to be working from the outside, because when I work with my yarn, I travel with it and it comes with me all over the place. If I work from the inside, this ball is going to collapse on itself and it's going to become a big tangled mess for me. If I work from the outside, it's going to stay nice and tight and a lot easier for me to work with. So I'm going to start with this ball and I'm going to work from orange all the way into this yellow. On this ball, I'm going to remove the blue portion and start with the yellow. This yellow is actually only a very short length, so I'm going to be able to use up this and then start with this yellow here, work into the center, and if I still need it, I can attach this dark blue on the end, and that'll keep all of my stripes in the same order and also keep the relative size of the stripes the same. So that's all the planning done, so let's get started. All right, so I've unwrapped a little bit of this yellow yarn from the outside of the cake. You can see I have my first color change right here. I'm going to cut my yarn right here because I'm going to start with the full length of orange. I don't want a little tiny stripe of yellow at the corner of my blanket. So I'm going to make my cut and just throw that aside. All right, so the first thing that I need to do is create a slip knot. When I make my slip knot, I just wrap my yarn around 2 fingers, hold it right here, and then I take the tail end of my yarn, push it through the hole, grab it from the front, and pull. All right, then you just insert your hook and tighten that up, just like that. All right, to begin the corner-to-corner blanket, you chain 6. So, yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook, yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook, and again, that's 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chains on my hook. This yarn is pretty fuzzy and it makes it pretty difficult to see the stitches, but you will get used to it as you work with it. Certain colors are a little bit easier to see the stitches. If you're having a really difficult time, you can even go up another hook size and it'll get a little bit easier to see the chains. So the next step is to skip 3 chains. So 1, 2, 3, and we're going to double crochet into the 4th chain. So to double crochet, you yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, make sure you grab both loops, yarn over, draw that loop through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, and pull through the last 2. You're also going to double crochet into your 5th and 6th chain. So yarn over, insert your hook into the chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, draw through 2, yarn over and draw through the last 2. And again for the last chain, yarn over, insert your hook into the chain, yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over and pull through 2 more loops. All right, and you've created your first box for your corner to corner. The corner to corner blanket is just made up of these little boxes. So on each row, we're going to add 1 more box, and then we'll turn and we'll add 1 more box to the next row. So this is actually row 1 and it's 1 box. So I'm going to go on to the second row. To start the second row, we chain 6, just like we started this first box. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And again, I'm going to double crochet into the 4th, 5th, and 6th chains. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Second double crochet. And this last one. All right. So now I have a box hanging out down here, and I've just created this new box. I'm going to take my hook, and I need to slip stitch into this chain 3 space from the first box. So this box is going to twist and come around, and I'm going to insert my hook right into that chain space. I'm not going into one of the individual chains, just into this gap that's made by the chain 3. So I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over and draw up a loop, and then draw that loop straight through the loop that's on my hook. And that's a slip stitch. So I'm going to do that one more time. Find your chain 3, insert your hook, yarn over, draw the loop up and through the loop on your hook. All right, and so now I'm going to make another box. This time it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to put 3 double crochets into that same chain 3 space. So yarn over, insert your hook into the chain 3 space, yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2 loops, yarn over and draw through the last 2 loops. And I'm going to do that 3 times total, so 2 more times. Yarn over, insert that. All right, so now I have this box that I've made over here, and now I have 1 more box here. So here's my chain 3 and my 1, 2, 3 double crochets. So that's the end of row 2. So here's my first box for row 1 and 1, 2 boxes for row 2. On the next row, we start the same way that we started this row. So we're going to chain 6. We're going to double crochet into the 4th, 5th, and 6th chains. All right. Now we find that chain 3 space, and we're going to slip stitch. Insert your hook, drop a loop, pull it through, And this is the part where we're going to chain 3 and then put 3 double crochets. So anytime you're adding a box to the beginning of the row, you're going to do the chain 6 and work back into the chain. Anytime you're adding onto the middle portion of the row or the very last box of the row, you're going to chain 3 and do 3 double crochets. They make the same shape, so you're still gonna end up with a chain 3 and 3 double crochets in each spot. But in order to add on, you have to do the chain 6 portion. So I'm going to finish this row. There's my chain 3 space. Insert my hook, drop a loop, draw it through the loop on my hook, chain 3, and then double crochet 3. All right, and there's the end of my 3rd row. Row 1, there's my 1 box. Here are my 2 boxes from row 2, and 1, 2, 3 boxes from row 3. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and continue on. You can work this way for as many rows as you'd like. For this project, I'm going to work most of this ball. When I'm starting to run out of yarn, I'm going to make that my last row of increases, and then I will add on my next ball of yarn and start decreasing back to the other corner. So this is one corner. We're going to work all the way out to the very middle of the blanket, and then we will work all the way back to the opposite corner. All right, I am just about to the first color change. So I want to show you just how that goes. It looks like I'm going to start that color change on this yarn over and pull through. This spot's a little bit weird to work with. It's just a little bit thicker and has kind of a different feel to it. It looks like this color change is mostly going to get hidden in this slip stitch. So that's convenient. It might not always work out that way, but just place it wherever it falls and just keep working. This color change happened to fall sort of in the middle of this row. It feels very noticeable at this point, but once the whole blanket is worked up, those color changes sort of just get lost in the whole effect of a striped blanket. So don't worry about it too much that the color change didn't happen at the beginning of one of your rows. If you wanted to change colors at the ends of your rows, striping yarn is probably not what you want to go with. You could just go with solid colors and change colors as you go. This one is convenient because it does all the color changes for you and you don't have ends to sew in. So I'm just going to keep working with my new color. All right, real quickly, I'd like to talk about turning your blanket as you work. You'll notice I have a tendency to work the first box. I do my chain 6 and then I work back into my chains and then I turn my project. If you're more comfortable, you can turn your project at this point and then do your chains. You might find it a little bit easier to figure out where you're going to put this slip stitch into the top of this stitch. When you turn your work, it's important that your working yarn stays behind your hook. So if you turn first, you turn it so that it comes forward and that your working yarn stays in the back. If you work the box first, you should turn your project the same way so that your yarn stays in the back. If I turn this the other direction so that I go backwards like this, my working yarn is going to come in front, and then when I go to do this, you're going to tangle everything all up. So, show you that one more time. So I've worked my box. I'm going to turn my project forward so that my yarn stays in the back. If I turn it backwards, this yarn flips around here to the front. So you don't want to do that as you're working this project, or any project for that matter. I've been adding blocks to both sides, and I've been working back and forth, and now I'm just about out of this first ball of yarn. So I am going to start decreasing. It's important to know that one of the sides is going to be your length and one side is going to be your width. If you decrease from both sides at the same time, you're going to end up with a square blanket. If you decrease only on one side and continue to increase on the other side, you're going to make your blanket rectangular. So if you're planning on making something for, say, a bed, you would want to continue increasing on one side until you've reached the length that you're happy with, and then start decreasing. So this blanket is at this point halfway done, because now I'm going to start decreasing from both sides and get a square blanket. So I'm going to show you how to do the decrease. So I'm going to make my last brick or block, slip stitch, chain 3, double crochet 3, on the row where you've decided to start decreasing, you're going to slip stitch into the chain 3, just like you were going to start a new block. But instead of chaining 3 and then putting 3 double crochets in here, you're going to chain 1 and turn the project, and then slip stitch into the top of each of the stitches from the block that you just made. So 3 slip stitches, and then slip stitch into the chain 3. And now you're going to work your row just like you've been working the whole time. So I'm going to chain 3, double crochet 3, two, and 3. And then slip stitch into the next block. And you just work like that across the whole row. So you can see now I've made the bottom corner of this blanket. As I work each row, I'm going to fill in this bottom edge and the opposite edge and make the full square. So I'm just going to keep working this row just the same way that we've been working each of the previous rows. You just slip stitch into the chain 3 space, chain 3, double crochet 3, and then slip stitch into the next chain 3 spot, all the way across the row. All right, I've worked all the way back across to the other side. This is all I have left of my ball of yarn, so I'm going to do my final decrease, and then I am going to add my next ball of yarn on. To decrease, we just need to slip stitch into this chain 3 space, chain 1, turn the project, and slip stitch all the way back to where we want to work. And I'm just going to get that color change in there. And then this is my chain 3 space. I'm going to slip stitch into there, chain 3, and then I'm going to start my double crochets. This is where I'm going to change yarn colors. I've just started into this yellow section, and so it's a good place for me to add the next ball of yarn. And I like to change yarn colors when I'm working a stitch instead of a chain, if I can help it. So I'm going to start my double crochet, and then I am going to grab my new ball of yarn. And as I said before, I'm going to remove the whole outside blue portion. And I can wind that up into a ball later, or just use it at the end of the project. All right, there's my color change. And I'm just gonna snip that yarn. I'm gonna set my whole pile of blue yarn off to the side and add my yellow yarn. So when I do a color change, I make a slip knot, and then I go back to where I was working the double crochet. Instead of yarning over and pulling through 2, like you would normally do, you take your slip knot, add it onto the hook, and pull it through the first 2 loops on your hook. Now here is a really important part. Make sure that you're now working with your yarn from your new ball, and that you don't accidentally pick up your old yarn or the tail from the slip knot. So I've got my new yarn in my hand, and I'm just going to yarn over and pull through the last 2, and then finish my last 2 double crochets. All right, so to finish that up, you can tie these in a knot, this tail from your slip knot and the tail from your old yarn, or you can just sew them in. They should hold securely. I generally do tie them as long as the knot isn't going to be a big problem. So I just tie them in a quick knot. And then if I have more yarn than I want hanging around, I just snip that to a length that's easy to sew in. And I can set that aside with my scrap yarn. And then I'm just going to keep working. I'm going to continue decreasing on both sides. And when I am close to finishing up, I'll check back in with you guys. All right. I'm just about to the end of the corner to corner blanket. So I am going to just finish this off. Three double crochets. All right. And I'm getting dangerously close to the next color change. But I think I'm going to have just enough here to finish off this corner. All right. So chain 1 and turn, and then slip stitch back down the row. Slip stitch into the chain 3, chain 3, double crochet 3, and make the very last slip stitch into that chain 3 space. Now, you can see this is the top corner right here, and I'm down here. If I was going to start a border, I would want to slip stitch back to here, and then start my border all the way around if you're going to just keep working continuously with the yarn. If you are going to finish off your project, bind off here, and then attach new yarn, it probably doesn't really matter. But I'm going to go ahead and chain 1 and slip stitch back to that corner. And then I'm going to bind off in the corner just because that's how I want to finish off this project. So when I bind off, I make my last slip stitch. There's my last slip stitch, yarn over, and I draw through, just making 1 chain 1. Then I grab my scissors, cut enough of a tail to sew in an end, and just pull that all the way through, and then pull that tight, and that will stay nice and tight. And then I'm ready to sew in my ends on this blanket. So I have a couple of options to sew in ends. This is just a straight yarn needle. Pretty standard. You can usually get a 2-pack of these for like 99 cents. These are bent tip yarn needles. I like these a little bit better for sewing in ends. The little bent tips just come through your stitches a little easier. And I like the colors. I usually pick one that contrasts with my project, so it's nice and easy to see my needle. For this project, though, I really like these Susan Bates yarn needles. And that is because this yarn needle here, you can use the blanket yarn and you can just pop your blanket yarn through, and you're ready to go. For the other type of yarn needle, so this type, you really probably are going to need a yarn threader. So the way this works is you put the threader through your hole, and then you grab your tail, put it in the hook, and pull that through. You probably can get this threaded without the yarn threader, but it's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to be fun to do a whole bunch of ends. So I can get it through, and sometimes if you grab the end of that, it starts unraveling. So it's not terribly difficult, but it'll make it a lot easier if you have a lot of ends to sew in, if you have a threader, or if you use these open type of yarn needles from Susan Bates. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my end in. I always try to sew my ends in where there is a row of stitches. So you can see here, I've got a whole bunch of loops all in a row. So I need to work my yarn back to that section, and I'll show you why I always choose those areas in just a second. So I've just threaded that through the double crochet, and I'm going to pull down right through there, and that just hides in there nicely. And then I'm going to pick up all of these loops. So I'm threading my yarn needle through all of them. I'm going to pull it all the way through, and then I'm going to skip this loop and go back through the whole row. And that is going to just lock that in place. And I have never had a end come undone if you go through a whole row and then back across it, just skipping one loop. If you don't skip this loop, you're just going to pull your yarn back through the whole row. So you skip one and then go back through the rest of the row. And I've never had any problem with ends coming undone in the wash machine, over time being worn, none of that. So I just pull a little bit and make it a little tighter than I want it to be, snip that off, and then I pull back a little bit. And then that end just disappears into the whole row of stitches. And now that one's sewn in, so I just need to go find my other ends. I should have 4 total, the one at the end, the 2 in the middle from where I joined the second ball, and the one at the very beginning. So here are my 2 from that join, and my 1 from the very beginning. So I'm just going to sew those in, and I'm ready. I could either be done with the blanket, or I'm ready to add a border. I think I'm going to add a crab stitch border to this blanket just to make it look a little bit cleaner. So if you're interested in seeing how that's done, there will be a link to that video in the description. All right, so I've finished my corner to corner blanket. It took me about 2 days using this heavyweight yarn. You can obviously work up a corner to corner blanket in any weight yarn with the appropriate sized hook. I used the blanket yarn, and I used about 600 grams for this blanket. I have about 30 grams left, and it's really only like scrap lengths. This blanket turned out to be about 3 foot on each side with a pretty simple border. I did a 2-row border, 1 row of single crochets, and then a row of reverse single crochet or crab stitch. Just something to keep in mind when you're working with a self-striping yarn on a corner-to-corner project, that you don't get to control the locations of your color changes or the thickness of your stripes. So in this case, I have a large yellow triangle and then a stripe that's about 4 blocks thick, followed by a stripe that has 4 blocks right here and only 2 blocks right here. And that's because I can't control where the color changed. So in this case, it changed right here and right here. So I've got a thick stripe here, and then it thins out on this side. Additionally, on this yellow triangle, I have a blue block down here, and I would not have picked to have a blue block here if I was changing colors by adding the different colors in. But because the yarn was self-striping, it changes on its own. I think that this effect is exaggerated by the fact that the yarn is so thick, meaning that if I was working with a thinner yarn, this would still happen, but the blocks would be much smaller, and I don't think they would draw your eye quite so quickly. If anything wasn't clear or you have any questions about working up a corner-to-corner blanket, leave them in the comment section below. If you like this video, hit subscribe so that you get notifications about future crafting videos. Thanks for watching.